always miss the best part of us. The best part of us.
Então, vamos ouvir um dos maiores especialistas da atualidade em desenvolvimento de inteligência artificial generativa e aprendizado de máquina e melhor compreender tanto a complexidade do desenvolvimento dessas tecnologias quanto seu imenso potencial. Esta última sessão especial do IC Fórum Brasil 2024 é um oferecimento do nosso parceiro Meta e será realizada em inglês. Eu chamo ao palco James BELDOCK, diretor da plataforma de IA generativa e open source na Meta, nos Estados Unidos.
Falarei com vocês esta tarde sobre os desafios do desenvolvimento de modelos de IA generativa. Mas, antes de começar, um pedido de desculpas. O meu português é terrível. Não é forte o suficiente para continuar essa apresentação em português. Eu vou mudar ao inglês para poupar a agonia de meu português. Então, se vocês aguardem um momento por a tradução e vou continuar em inglês, se está bem. Obrigado. Desculpe meu português. Oh, wait, they gave me, I'm giving you time to put the translation on if you want it. Can everybody, wow. Hello, yes, you can hear me, that's very loud. Thank you for suffering through my terrible Portuguese. I come every 3 years and practice just a little bit, and you can tell how little I practice. My name is James. I work on generative AI at Meta. And I want to spend some time on the concepts, the changes that we've seen in generative AI over the last few years. So first, a little bit of an introduction to the concept. How many people here are comfortable that they could define generative AI in Portuguese, not in English, if I were to ask? I will not ask. I'm just interested to see how many people could do it. Okay. Tá bom. I guessed right. I came prepared to define it for you. So let me just start with history. AI has been around for a long time. Up until maybe 3 years ago, all of the commercial AI that was available to the market was a type of AI that we call discriminative AI. Artificial intelligence that was able to discriminate, that was able to discriminate between one group and another. So I have a set of photographs and the AI can tell me, these are cats, these are dogs. That's the discrimination function. And up until about 3 years ago, most of AI was focused in that area. Not just cats and dogs, but what is the likelihood that I would wear a blue tie? Am I wearing a tie? Yes or no? That was the world of discriminative AI. And what you saw in, say, the picture in the middle, 1997, that's where AI started to get better at doing discriminative tasks and predictive tasks, calculations. AI got better than the humans. And so that's deep blue, when Garry Kasparov, who was the top chess player in the world at the time, famously lost his first match to IBM's Deep Blue. And that was the first deep learning model that was able to compete with humans for capabilities. But what it couldn't do was come up with something new. In fact, most of the moves in chess are not new. They're just extrapolations from the current data. And so the big change, AI 2.0, if you'll forgive the term, the big change is that AI can today actually generate new material, new media, new photos, new text. And so generative AI, now you can define it, is AI that is able to create something new based on what it learned before. If this sounds familiar, it should, because it's what we all do in school. We are all taught, as little humans into big humans, that we learn things and then we produce new things because we learned them. So now that we've talked a little bit about the definition of AI, or generative AI, I should say, let's move on to the fundamentals of how we generate new content. And in fact, we have this term, modelos fundamentais, foundation models in English. And this term refers to the models that are underneath all of the other behaviors that you have seen generative AI perform. They tend to be trained, is the term we use, on a huge amount of information. So the data on the left of the slide is something on the order of trillions, 10 trillion or more words in particular languages, or literally hundreds of billions of images, or hundreds of thousands of hours of audio, sometimes more than that. And the intent of the model is to understand the connections between all of those different inputs. Now, of course, we give it more structure than just that, but the idea is that this unstructured information that comes in, data on the left, is transformed into knowledge. This is very different from existing AI systems that were trained with discrete information. My first name is James, my last name is BELDOCK, I speak English, I speak bad Portuguese. Those were all in fields in old school AI. In the current world, all of that information is on my note card in a picture. And the model has to figure out, this part is James, and this part is the last name, BELDOCK, and this part is bad Portuguese. And that is not something that the models have previously been able to do. So the critical thing to understand here is that generative AI models generate understanding and then content. Okay, so once we have all of this data, what do we do with it? We put it through a very complicated training process, that's the first arrow. And to put this in perspective, this can run on anything from 10,000 servers in a data center, all the way up to 100,000 or more GPUs, the types of processors on which you train these models. So this is a very high-end piece of equipment, which we'll talk about in a little bit, designed to process information in parallel. There have not been a lot of things done in the whole history of humanity that required 100,000 of anything to compute a single model. And so the critical thing to get in one's head here is that if you took your laptop, you would need several 100,000 of those to generate a single model. Oh, and by the way, you would have to put it in a data center for 4 months or maybe longer. So the process is long, the processing, the compute is very, very high. And thus we and the industry invests a great deal in making sure that those models have the maximum capabilities. And you'll see an example of the tasks that they can perform here. We're just scratching the surface. We're just at the top level right now of what these models can do. ChatGPT or Meta AI can talk to me and answer a question about, let's see, who is the top soccer player in the world was the question that Stefano gave me earlier today. And then have an argument, of course, with me about that question. But you can imagine within a year, there are going to be able to be models that listen to my conversation with you here, read the slides on video, and then ask me 5 difficult questions when I come off stage. I'm not looking forward to that, but it's going to happen. So let's just start with one last piece of terminology before I go on. You've undoubtedly heard this term LLM. That's the English acronym for a large language model. To be clear, you're going to hear about LLMs, large language models, even though many of these models can now take in images, and they can process video, and they can process speech, the sound of my voice, not a transcription of my voice, but the actual sound of my voice. They are still technically called LLMs because of the internal architecture. We at Meta have started a series of models that give some idea, will give you some idea of just how quickly this curve is bending. You know, we as humans, we are used to things going linearly. I have a 12-year-old daughter, and her height has gone like this since she was born, and at some point it'll stop. But I have a 14-year-old son. His height is also like this. It did not go like this. That doesn't happen. I don't have a giraffe. And these models, the performance is going like this. And so you have to think a little bit differently. It looks linear. It's not linear. It's curved. It is concave up. And the increase per step is itself getting faster. So each step, maybe it's this much the first time, then the next one is this much, then the next one is this much, the next one is way up there in the ceiling. When you go from the model on the left, oh, it translated the word llama. Okay, that is a typographic error. Llama is spelled the way Americans and Spanish speakers spell llama. My apologies. So Llama 1 on the left was a research model. Llama 2, which we released last summer, so really only 15 months ago, Llama 2 was trained on about 2 trillion tokens. A token is about 2/3 of one word. To put this in perspective, the largest physical library in the world is the US Library of Congress. Most estimates are that the US Library of Congress contains about 3 trillion words. So Llama 2, last summer, 15 months ago, was trained on somewhere between half and 2/3 of all of the written words in the largest library in the world. And that was 15 months ago. Now, here's a number that will shock you. When I go to Llama 3, Llama 3 is spelled in Portuguese, Llama, okay, never mind. This is the sort of thing that will bother me tonight. So Llama 3 was trained on 15 trillion tokens with a T. So this means that it is at least 5 times bigger in training material than the estimate of the largest library in the world, which is the Library of Congress. Now, of course, the internet is bigger. We don't have physical books to worry about. Yes, there is more data out there, and so we're training on it. But the key thing to know here is that the scale is so massive. And that massive scale results in a couple of things. One, each individual type of data, remember I was saying my first name is James, my last name is BELDOCK, that is lost in the process because it's like finding one grain of sand on a beach this large. I'm nothing at that point. And that means the data are very diluted and the capabilities that you develop are developed by large patterns in the data, not individual relationships. Okay, so if we look at the actual numbers behind this model, I mentioned that in last summer we had a model that was trained on 2 trillion tokens. This summer we released a model that was trained on 15 trillion tokens. And then on the left you can see the sizes of the model that we produce. Now you can think of the size of the model as the number of neurons in the brain of the model, whereas the tokens is how much the brain has read. So each of these 3 models has been trained on 15 trillion tokens worth of data, but they have different sized brains. And one is an 8 billion sized brain. That's an average brain. The 405 billion parameter brain, that is bigger than most of the production models in the world. So if you look at our services or OpenAI or other competitors, nobody is running that big thing in production except for special cases. Why? 405 billion parameters is very big. It takes a long time to come up with the answers, seconds, not milliseconds, and you need many servers to run it. So if I'm going to involve this whole audience with the larger model, I need multiple servers, which is not true for the smaller ones. A couple of other things that might be interesting to know. 15 trillion tokens, 128,000 tokens when you ask it a question. So if you ask it a simple question, it can respond like that. But you can also pass it 128,000 tokens. Well, how much is 128,000 tokens? It's the size of a small book. Would you mind holding that up for a second? If that were printed with a book, it would be about that much information. So you can pass that much information into the model and then get a response. So if I had two books, I could say, tell me the difference between these books. And within one go around, these models are now capable of operating at that scale. So it would not be unreasonable to think that within a few years, there will be no limit on how much information you can put in, and virtually no limit on how much information the model could have been trained on. It's possible to train on. There are practical limits in terms of time, GPU, money, but we're getting to the place where the technology is good enough to consume basically all the information there is, and then increasingly good at producing results. Okay. I wanted to spend 1 minute on the types of data that go into these models. In the prior world, up until about 9 months ago, this is how fast this industry is moving, the only thing that went into these models was text, just the first line here. Today, within 9 months of my being able to say that correctly, every one of these types of data is being experimented in new models. And so the models that we produced this summer that Meta has shared in open source, those understand images, and they understand text, and they are able to generate images in some cases. Well, actually, image generation is a different model, but eventually these will combine. Very soon, you will see video understanding. Some just feed the video of my presentation into the model and then ask for a summary, and the summary will come out. First line will read, James speaks bad Portuguese. The second line will read, then he speaks about things in English, something like this. Okay. I wanted to explain what is probably the most contentious, the most difficult issue we have to face about the data that are used to train these models. As you probably know, there has been a lot of interest around the world from regulators and from the industry about what data can go into a model and what data cannot go into a model. Because, as I've mentioned, these models are very big, and that means we need to source the data from everywhere. I met with my Brazilian colleagues yesterday, and we came up with examples of things that a model would not be able to do if it were not trained on data from actual Brazilian Portuguese speakers, and critically, if it wasn't trained on the way they express themselves informally online, as opposed to the formal language that you might see in legislation or in a book. There are lots of books that have been translated. So if you want to train the model to sound like a book, it's not that hard. But if you want to train a model to sound like everybody here, unless like Stefano, you sound like a book. The rest of us, if you want to sound normal, sorry, buddy. If you want to sound normal, you have to train it on how we actually sound. And where do you get that information? Mostly online. I would propose that you get a lot of it from online video platforms. You get a lot of it from social media. And so we have a little interactive session. I'm going to show you a picture and ask you what you call this thing. What would you call those? Bolacha? Anybody for biscoito? Biscoito. Obrigado. Okay, right. So that's the first regionalism that I want to call out. The concept is global. There are cookies everywhere in the world. The Americans call these cookies. The British call them biscuits. You have bolacha and biscoito. Excuse my pronunciation the first time. Not a surprise. So global concept, regional difference. If you don't train on both of these, you're going to make a mistake if you're a model. Now, here's another one. Now, this is not a global concept. I can't find these in the United States. They do exist, but you have to go find them hard. So this is a concept that is more common in Brazil than it is in other parts of the world. What do we call this thing? Okay, I got all three of them right. So this is what I understood their possible names are. Now this is tricky because it's not just three different names. It's a concept that is more common in Brazil and Colombia and a few other places, and not as common in California or Washington, D.C. or London. And so you need to train the model not just on local concepts, but also how those local concepts are spoken in different communities. Now, my favorite one of these is this one. Anybody from Minas? Okay, everybody's ahead of me because I was slow to get the joke. But the thing on the left, the global concept, is a train. And I think everybody here knows that that thing is a train. Even in English, it's a train. What's the thing on the right in Minas? Oh, wow. I didn't pronounce it right, but right. So this is the problem. And this is the sort of thing that gets a model in trouble, if you will forgive it creates problems for the model. Because not only do we have to understand that this one is innocent. If you make this mistake, somebody in Minas is going to understand what you're talking about. There were 4 others that I am not going to mention here that I can't talk about in public, but if you say them to the model, they will get it wrong and think you are saying something inappropriate when you were saying something appropriate, or vice versa. We had a lot of fun with the options we couldn't put on the slide, but they are the ones that cause the problems. They are the ones that cause the safety problems. They are the ones that cause the problems for young people operating with models. Because if you don't train them on the local information, you get a global stance that doesn't understand the difference between any of these things. Okay, I'm a little bit behind. So what I do want to just emphasize before I try to wrap up here is that one of the critical new developments in AI is that we are training the model itself to be safe from the beginning, not afterwards. And so when you're improving the model, you are quite literally in the middle of a process where you look at the model performance, you look at the safety, and you say, performance went this way, safety went that way. No good. We have to bring the performance down and bring the safety up. And striking that balance, this is where you can really see why those regional examples I gave from Brazil, from Brazilian Portuguese, on the slide before, are so critical. Because if you don't have them in this process, afterwards, it's a little too late. The model is able to do the wrong thing. And when the model is able to do the wrong thing, it's only a matter of time before an adversary is able to go in and make it do the wrong thing. Which actually brings me to adversaries. So in English, we have the term red team. I don't know if equipe vermelha is the right term in Portuguese, but it is the term for, in English, the group that you ask to break your product, to create problems for you. And by creating problems, you find the problems and you fix them. This process is earlier in AI than it is in traditional software. Most software, you don't try to break it when you write it. You try to break it after it is written. That is not true for AI, and it's critically not true for AI because the model's abilities start on the very early phases of the training. And that's why having access to broad amounts of safety data, as well as good red teaming, is critical early in the development of models. Another area that we feel strongly in, and I know that some of you may be familiar with this because you may have looked at the Llama models, is that we think the work on safety and appropriate use of models is a challenge technically, but also professionally and as a business. And so we've put together this guide that we call a guide to responsible AI development. But its critical element is that you cannot just produce a technical solution. You also have to produce a product. And the product has to have safety and has to have mechanisms for the user to say, this is good, this is bad. So for example, we learned very early that each time you have an interaction with the model, we need to give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down opportunity. Why? Because we make mistakes. AI is not perfect. And if we launch the product in a new region, we're going to make mistakes like biscoito in say that in Sao Paulo, and people will go, terrible. And we need to be able to respond to that. Not only do we need to be able to respond to it, but we need to tell others who are going to use these models, hey, wait a second. You have to build all of the ability to give feedback, or else you are doing something unsafe. The only safe version is the version with a closed loop where you can get feedback in and make improvements. At least that's what we believe. Okay, so I'm gonna follow out here in my last minute or two with the challenges that are ahead of us. One of them is this challenge. If you look on the left here, you'll see that these numbers are not going linearly. These numbers are logarithmic. This is a logarithmic scale. And you can see that the fact that we're going straight on a logarithmic scale means that in fact, the amount of compute and the amount of power that is required is going like this. When something goes like this, you know two things. One, somebody is going to invest a lot of money to go keep up with that. And two, that the research efforts are going to have to be earlier and earlier because you can't afford to make a mistake when you're already way up here. When my children learn to ride a bicycle, they can make a mistake, it's no problem. But if I make a mistake driving my car, it's a much bigger problem. People could get hurt. A similar problem exists here as you go out on the edges. Then I think the last thing I want to mention is all of this is driven by an investment in silicon, in chips. And what you'll notice is that this curve is bending also. Whether we can keep it bending is another story, but as you look, you'll see the processing power is going up very fast, but the timeline, if you actually look at the numbers on the left, the numbers are not growing as fast. The curve is bent, but the scale is not logarithmic. So the hardware is not keeping up with the challenge. And that's why you see a lot of joint efforts like ours, but also some very serious market issues that have to be managed. Right now, there are only a couple of suppliers of silicon. And as a result, those markets are very constrained. I think the final thing I'll mention is that the more data we can bring to these models, not only the safer, but the more appropriate for each market they will be. I don't think that we will have a single data training set for Brazil. I'm fairly certain we will have many data training sets for Brazil. Some things for the north, it'll be different in Porto Alegre, it'll be different in Recife. That's very normal. And I think as these systems get bigger, we're going to get better at developing mechanisms to pull those data in and in fact, make the models specific to those areas. I think that's my last slide. Yeah, it is. So thank you very much for your time and for suffering through my presentation.
Muito bem, chegamos ao final do nosso encontro. Agradecer em nome da Proteste, da Euroconsumers Brasil, por tanto tempo de vocês, por estarem aqui conosco e agradecer principalmente a equipe que colocou esse evento de pé aqui. Agradecer principalmente a equipe da Newsnet, que também desde o início desse evento fez todo o planejamento, trabalhou junto com a equipe dela, junto com a Patrícia e junto com a Sabrina também. E eu agradeço ao Henrique também pela oportunidade de estar aqui, pelos convidados e também pelo Marco Perani, nosso convidado especial aqui nesse nosso evento, nesse nosso encontro. Muito obrigado e até o próximo.